Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo, taking a look at tonight's 10-game Monday slate. Good amount of games, cleared up weather for the most part here, a couple areas, but doesn't look like a major concern, which is nice because last week we had to deal with a lot of rain. But here, decent-sized slate. There are a couple pitching options. It's not standout pitching on tonight's slate. I think there's going to be more areas we can look at for bats than pitching, but overall, decent slate. At least we get 10 games. We got some areas to choose from. So let's dive in here. First one, we got Yankees and Phillies. Jonathan Osaiga taking on Vincent Velasquez. This one's an interesting one. It's in Philly, so obviously the Yankees will lose the DH. Doesn't matter a whole lot, just given the fact that they just placed Gary Sanchez on the DL or are about to. You're probably going to see like Austin Romine behind the dish. Velasquez is interesting, obviously, where he's a guy that has some strikeout upside in this spot, especially if the Yankees roll out some right-handed heavy lineup, which, really you're probably going to get about 2 or 3 lefties into this lineup. It would be either Gardner or Hicks, one of the two, Gregorius, Greg Bird. Concerning bats, but there is some strikeout upside for Velasquez, especially at 6'6". If you want to roll the dice in GPPs, you certainly can. Against right hitters this year, 101 ISO, 274 WOBA, his strikeout rate near 30%. Lefties, this is where things get a little bit more tricky, 361 WOBA, 266 ISO, but still a 27% strikeout rate. So, if he can get around Gardner, Gregorius, Bird, I think he's got obviously a good shot here. To pick up some strikeouts. Yankees run total is always going to be relatively high, but by prior standards, 4.7 isn't as much as where they've been sitting at for most of this year. So Velasquez is definitely interesting. Like I said, if I'm targeting him here, it's going to be with Bird and Gregorius. I don't give too much credit to Gardner here. Not a big power bat. Just kind of a contact guy. Doesn't have a ton of power, although this ballpark isn't bad for lefty power. But Gregorius, he's heated back up in June. You can certainly look to him. Bird, 243 ISO. He's fairly cheap. He's 3.7 on DraftKings. You can look to use him there, but just a GPP guy for me. A couple other options I'd rather go with in cash games. Philly side of things here, we're looking at a guy who's pretty talented. The walks have been the biggest issue for him. There are some strikeouts here. He is a guy who does throw that slider about 32% of the time, and this is a team that doesn't particularly hit that slider well. As always, we talk about Cesar Hernandez, Carlos Santana, two guys that hit that pitch pretty well. But overall, this is a spot where he could be able to get by and rack up some strikeouts. I definitely don't mind him in GPPs as well. SP2s, a little risky for cash, but looking at this slate, there's not a lot of cheaper options that you can go with if you want to still get some bats, so you can certainly look to do so. He's pretty much cutter, fastball, slider. That's about what he's got. He's got a pretty high velocity fastball sitting at 96. There is a couple bats that do stand out to him. Obviously, Hernandez and Santana are both GPP options in this spot. The problem is they're just a little bit too expensive. I don't know what's up with the Phillies increase, but I will say Nick Williams is interesting here, 427, with 240 ISO against cutters, 77% contact rate. That's something that you can look at here as a cheap guy. He's been heating up a little bit as well. But overall, not a ton of interest in this Phillies side at these price tags. Seattle-Baltimore next here. Felix Hernandez taking on Andrew Cashner. I don't have interest in either one of these pitchers. Hernandez lost it a long time ago. I know he's getting Baltimore, a team that we like to pick on, but I can't just go there here tonight, 7K. I'd rather take an option on the previous two pitchers who are right in that same price range and have honestly just shown the strikeout upside this year. Andrew Cashner on the other side, he's going to be obviously a popular guy to stack against. So let's talk Seattle bats here. Cashner, guy allowing over 400 WOBA to right-handers this year, 209 ISO, but even lefties, 356 WOBA, 242 ISO. Fly balls, much more to lefties, but hard contact, much more to righties. You can definitely go either way here. I'm looking at, obviously, the guys that hit sinkers particularly well. I don't mind paying up for some of these guys, but obviously Mitch Haniger, Nelson Cruz, Kyle Seager, all guys in play. Seager's an excellent cheaper option. He's 4-1. The price did come up a little bit, but 401 WOBA, 257 ISO against sinkers, 93% contact rate. I don't mind going there. Mike Zunino's an interesting GPP catching option as always. Big power, but doesn't make a ton of contact. But against sinkers, 78%, which isn't bad by his standards. 204 ISO, 38% hard contact rate. So Zunino's interesting. Gene Segura has been banged up. Keep an eye on him in the lineup. He's a little bit too expensive, especially coming back off an injury. But guys like D. Gordon, Ryan Healy, Denard Span, whatever third outfielder gets in there, is all going to be in play here for Seattle. They are going to be a team that I do get cash and GPP exposure to tonight. Baltimore side, it's usually the lefties. The problem is there's not a ton of lefties. If we're looking at maybe like a cheaper Colby Rasmus, guy who hasn't made a ton of contact, but it's got some home run pop. He's 3,200 if you want to take a shot. I have a feeling he's going to be popular. If that's the case, I don't mind using him a little bit here, but it kind of scales back my love just because he is such a boomer bust guy. When you look at Hernandez, he's a guy who's throwing a lot of off-speed stuff, so he could get to Baltimore here. I just don't think there's enough upside. I'm not terribly high on Baltimore, but I'm not terribly high on using Hernandez here either. Manny Machado, Mark Trumbo are interesting, especially Trumbo heating up a little bit of late. Adam Jones, even though they're righties here, they're basically the row that we want to target here in this spot. And even like a Jonathan Scope, I don't hate because his numbers off curveballs aren't that bad. And that's a pitch that he will throw so many times as well, 27%. But Scope 405 WOBA, 283 ISO against that pitch dating back to 2016. So you can certainly look to go that route. Washington, Tampa, two lefties on the hill here. Gio Gonzalez taking on Blake Snell. Don't have a lot of love for this game. I think the pitching options are both interesting. I think there are some strikeouts in this one for both sides. Gio's a little bit cheaper. He's been struggling a bit. Starting with him, a guy who's 22% strikeout rate this year. The walks have been slowly coming up a little bit, which is a concern. Isn't allowed a ton of hard contact, which obviously is solid. Been decent against righties. If you're looking here, it's going to be Cron and Ramos. Those are kind of the two guys that we like to look at quite a bit, especially Cron, a guy who has some power against that curveball. And even against a changeup, not a bad option here. But Ramos against that changeup, 253 ISO. And then when you look at the sinker, both those guys hit them particularly well. Cron, especially 405 WOBA. So you got some positive options here in this one. I doubt this game will, it's going to be one that people target for offense, and those two are the only really ones that stand out to me. If a Daniel Robertson gets in the lineup, he's interesting because he's been mashing lefties. He's a cheap middle infield option for 3.3, 241 ISO, 386 WOBA. That's kind of where I'd be going here. And if like a Johnny Field or really Adames gets into the lineup, you can look at a couple righties. They're definitely on the contrarian side in GPPs. That's about it though on this Washington side, and still, like I said, Gio's like a GPP option. Strikeout rate's still there. Projected line of 27% strikeout rate against lefties. I know some of these guys are a small span, but a lot of young bats, that do swing and miss quite a bit. So Gio's definitely in play for GPPs, but I'm not going there in cash games. Blake Snell, a guy who's pitched well this year, 27% strikeout rates, has been really dominant against left-handed hitters, which is something that's appealing today, given that you're still probably going to get Eaton, Harper, Murphy, Soto. Obviously, those guys, Defoe will switch over from the right side, but a lot of these guys, still scary. Harper, Soto still over 200 ISO, but guys like Eaton, Murphy, I don't mind targeting here. So Snell is a guy, GPP option tonight, 294 WOBA allowed to righties, 171 to lefties, 32% strikeout rate to left-handed hitters, 26% to righties. A guy who has that high velocity fastball, which a lot of these guys do hit well, but he is getting some whiffs on it as well. But then when you look at some of the secondary stuff, if you can rely on that a little bit more, he's very much in play. So it's a decent option. If you're looking at target, it's probably going to be Anthony Rendon here, who's red hot, just has monster power numbers against lefties, 391 WOBA, 250 ISO this year, 49% hard contact rate. But that's about it. But I'm kind of more intrigued on with the pitchers here in this spot and the strikeout upside that they have. There's better options that we can get to as far as offenses go. Pittsburgh and New York next year. Jameson Taillon taking on Seth Lugo. This is a spot where I don't have a lot of interest in either of these two arms or offenses. Talian's a guy who's shown some strikeout upside at times. The problem is lefties, hit him a little bit worse off than righties. 340 WOBA, 174 ISO. You can look at a Brandon Nemo here, Asdrubal Cabrera, Dominic Smith. These are all intriguing options. Confortos, the guy still hasn't shown a ton of power coming off the injury, but still a cheap option. That would be where I look to go, but I think overall Talian's a guy that I don't tend to pick on, especially if he's going to rely on that curveball quite a bit. If he throws it, 20-25% of the time, there is some potential here. I do think he's got a decent enough floor as like an SP2 guy. That's kind of where I'd be looking to use him here tonight. But GPPs, maybe not a ton of upside, but overall, decent play. Like I said, it's not a spot that I'm really looking to target Italian here. Decent ballpark. The weather's not too bad. Both these implied totals under 4. Other side, this one, Seth Lugo. He's pitched relatively well. The strikeouts have been there. He's right around 27% at both sides of the plate. A guy who will throw that curveball quite a bit. There's some guys that have decent contact numbers against that curveball, so that's the thing that's a little bit concerning. There's only one bat under about 72% in this spot, and that's Starling Marte. So with that being said, I don't know if Lugo's the spot that I'd be looking to go. I think Talian's the other option just because Pirates are just such a better contact lineup. They're right around 80% in their projected lineup, even though they haven't done a ton against right-handed pitching of late. But I think it's kind of a wait-and-see approach with Lugo, and I'll move on to the next matchup where he's got a little bit more strikeout upside. But that being said, I don't have a ton of interest in picking on him either. Austin Meadows, if you want a one-off from this spot, is interesting. Or, Corey Dickerson, Colin Moran, a couple of the lefties I think you can get to. But overall, there's not a lot of spots to attack in this game. Arizona, Miami. Next here, Dan Straley take on Shelby Miller. Shelby Miller working his way back. It's been a while since we've seen him pitch in the majors. Last time he pitched, it was not a good showing by any means. This game, the only downside is the ballpark, and obviously these two offenses can't go missing. Miami's also just getting out of a core series, but if we're looking at Straley's been absolutely awful, as expected, just allowing a lot of fly balls, a lot of hard contact. I do think Arizona's interesting. If people are going to fade them due to the ballpark, that's more than okay with me. You're looking at Goldschmidt, Lamb, Peralta, Descalso, John Jay, a lot of these options that are hitting from the left side. Get these big power numbers here because you look at Straley, 389 WOBA, 208 ISO allowed. The strikeouts are down. Obviously, he's not a big guy. Throws that low velocity fastball about 56% of the time, and that's where a lot of these Diamondbacks are just absolutely clubbing him. John Jay is not a big power guy, but like Goldschmidt, 450 ISO, Lamb, 524 ISO, Peralta, 226 ISO, Descalso, 278 ISO. So you have a lot of these options. If John Ryan Murphy gets in the lineup, I like him. If it's like Alex Avila or Jeff Mathis, I don't. But I think the Arizona Diamondbacks are obviously an interesting stack in this spot. I like them as one-offs, especially at some of these price tags. I know Goldschmidt and Peralta are a little expensive, but like Descalso, Lamb, Jay are all fairly priced, and obviously Ryan Murphy as well if he gets in there. So you can look to use these bats despite the bad ballpark. Miami side of things here, if you're targeting, it's usually, like with the lefties against Miller that I don't hate. The problem is it's just there's not a lot of guys that I'd love to use here tonight. Derek Dietrich leading off for like the Justin Boers line, but Boers 3.5 price tag is interesting given the fact that he's got a 253 ISO. We saw Miller last time he pitched. He was mainly a fastball cutter guy. Obviously, Boers saw the numbers against the fastball range. Curious to see what his velocity is coming back. That's something that could change. But as far as the cutter goes, and if he continues to use that, Dietrich, 435 WOBA, 250 ISO. That's something to keep an eye on. You look at Brian Anderson, 455 WOBA, 286 ISO. So there are some contrarian options that you can use in this lineup, but it's kind of boring Dietrich here for me. Cincinnati, Atlanta next. Mike Foltynewicz taking on Tyler Mahle. Start with this Atlanta side. Mahle's obviously a guy who's just been obliterated by left-handed hitters, and that's something that's going to stand out anyway against this Atlanta team. He's also a guy who just throws that fastball that's about 92, 93, about 64% of the time. That's where we're starting to get a lot of hitters in this spot. Insayarte is a guy who's moved up. I know some of these bats are a little bit expensive. It's not a cheap stack, really, but Insayarte is a guy who's been hitting the ball well since moving up to that leadoff spot. With Molly allowing a 402 WOBA, 275 ISO, and 46% hard contact rate. Insayarte, Albies, Freeman, Markakis is going to be a stack that I write about on the site as well. Even like a Johan Camargo, who's been hitting the ball pretty well, is very appealing. You got some decent hard contact rates and contact rates as well. And against that fastball range, I mean, there's a lot of guys that stand out. I mean, obviously, Albies, 488 ISO, Freeman, 359 WOBA. Even Camargo's got a 404 WOBA on this spot. So, in this ballpark, it's a warm, humid night. I expect the ball to fly. I like the Brave stack. I like them as one-offs. They are a little bit expensive, but that's the only downside about them. But I do think they're worth it in a stack. Fultino, a guy who struggles a little bit with lefties, which is my concern here against a Reds team that can roll out about 4, 5, 6 of them. Although Billy Hamilton, I guess, doesn't really count at this point. Fulte is a guy who's been throwing pretty solid this year. If he can stay healthy, I know he's got the arm issue. It's a little bit of a concern, but the only concerns here for me are obviously like a Scooter Jeanette and a Joey Votto. Both have good numbers against that high velocity fastball and against the sinker. None of these guys particularly great against the slider, so if he relies on that a little bit often, he can. But I mean, we look at him. I mean, the slider, 37% whiff rate this year, 38% whiff rate on that changeup. His sinker's doing what it should. 51% ground ball rate. Not allowing a ton of power, 135 ISO, and that's something that he's been better about. The problem is for me, it's the price. It's this team that doesn't strike out a lot. You got Schwebler and Suarez who will strike out a decent amount in Hamilton in the pitcher spot. But, for 11.8, he's kind of close in price to Verlander. There also are some cheaper, better points per dollar options that you can go with. I won't roll out Faulty if you want to use him in GPPs. I don't think he's going to find his way into my laps. I think I'm going to go some cheaper options and hope for that same strikeout upside and just have the ability to also get some bats in there too. So that's the one thing. Like I said, if you want to get contrarian, Votto and Jeanette are the two guys that you're looking to use here. Guys that probably won't get terribly high ownership on this one as well. So that's about it. San Diego, Texas, you got Cole Hamels take on Joey Lucchesi, two lefties. Hamels, fine option, GPPs. There's some strikeout upside. Given the fact that, he's throwing a lot of off-speed stuff, his curveball and changeup about 35-40% of the time, throwing a cutter and sinker as well. His cutter's been solid. His sinker has not been. The good thing about a sinker, he's not allowing a ton of power on it. But if you can get away from the hard stuff, he's going to be fine here. Looking at guys against the cutter, there's not a lot of options. You got Eric Hosmer, but it's lefty on lefty. Freddie Galvis will flip over, but not a lot of these guys really hit that cutter well, especially that curveball too. This is just a dreadful team against off-speed stuff. So, against lefties, obviously it's a team that's had some pop before, but I mean, the 25% strikeout rate in their projected lineup is something to note. They do get Will Myers back, who's an interesting GPP option, but hasn't particularly done well just yet. So Hamels, interesting GPP option. I don't have a ton of, guys I want to watch out for on the San Diego side outside of like a Christian Villanueva. Still massive power against lefties, 500 ISO this season, hard contact 46%, but also below 70% contact rate. So do note that. But Villanueva, Renfroe, Myers, all GPP guys that you can look to use. But I think Hamels at 9.9 is going to be an interesting GPP option. If it becomes popular, then maybe you can look at a couple more Padres bats and GPPs. Like, Perella, Margot, Galvis, that would kind of be it. But overall, it is a hot night. That's one thing to say. But you do have the wind blowing in a little bit. I do think Hamels has some strikeout upside in this spot. Texas, Lucchesi, not a bad arm by any means. Coming off a start that wasn't particularly great. He's a guy who throws a sinker and a curveball. And that's about it. His sinker only a 46% ground ball rate, 313, but a 380 expected WOBA, 494 expected WOBA on his curveball. His curveball's not bad, 38% whiff rate, but guys like Elvis Andrus, 194 ISO against it, 391 WOBA, Profar 186 ISO, Kiner Falefa 214 ISO, Gallo 180 ISO, Chirinos 315 ISO, Delando Shields 220 ISO. that's when they're making good contact, and that's the thing. Texas is a boomer bust team tonight against Lucchesi. I think Lucchesi has some strikeout outside. I just don't know if I can quite stomach using him over some of the other pitching options on the slate. When you look at sinkers here, there's a lot of names that do stand out. The problem is there are a couple of them are lefties, like Chu, 220 ISO, Mazzara, 273 ISO, but Beltre, a guy that, obviously has a good track record against left-handers, 411 WOBA, 234 ISO. And then Gallo 388 ISO and a 74% contact rate. So I like the Texas stack here. They're not badly priced, especially the guys that I want to use. Choose your most expensive, but I think I'm going to be leaving him out of it. But with Andrus back, Peltre, Profar, Mazzara, these guys have been hitting lefties fairly well this year. Connor Fluff is a guy you can use, and Chirinos 231 ISO against Southpaws this year. So there's definitely options. I think Texas is going to be a contrarian way to go tonight. But they also have a very low floor, so I do resort them to just kind of being GPP plays. Although Andrus at 4-2 is a fine cash game option for me. Toronto, Houston, Jay Happ taking on Justin Verlander. Verlander, your safer, expensive cash game option. Guy's just been pitching tremendously well. We don't need to talk about him too much. 32% strikeout rate this year, just been dominant against both sides of the plate, not allowing a ton of power. Guy throwing that slider about 23-24% of the time, got the high velocity fastball, just a lot of stuff that Toronto struggles with. So they have the strikeout upside in this spot, 22.5% strikeout rate in that projected lineup. I'm not picking on Verlander here. Going to be looking to use him in GPPs and cash games. Houston side of things against Happ. Happ's obviously pitched pretty well, 28% this year. Hasn't allowed a ton of power to either side of the plate, although he is allowing a lot of fly balls to righties. Still, because he's a guy who will rely on that fastball quite a bit, George Springer, Alex Bregman, two guys I think are very much in play here. The prices have come down. Springer's only 4.5, Bregman's 4.6. Altuve Correa still a little bit expensive, but like Gaddis 4.2 or Max Stassi 3.5. These would be the guys that I'm looking to use. Springer, obviously, always dangerous against lefties, 278 ISO, Bregman, 193 ISO, Gaddis, 272 ISO, Max Stassi, 268 ISO. Those are the guys I'm looking at. If you want to roll out a full stack, I'm fine with adding Altuve and Correa. They're just a little bit expensive. I'm going some other directions in the middle infield. I think because Bregman and Springer are about $400, $500, $600 cheaper, those would be the guys I look to use on the Toronto side. And Happ's a guy who does throw that fastball quite a bit and a sinker. Doesn't throw a ton of off-speed stuff, which could be trouble for him tonight against his Houston team. Cleveland, Seattle, or sorry, not Seattle, St. Louis. Mike Clevinger taking on John Gant. Clevinger, an interesting GPP option here. He's pitched pretty well. Strikeout rate a little bit down compared to last year, but he's got some good stuff. Mainly fastball slider, but will throw that curveball every now and then. He's got whiff rates over 35% on both his off-speed pitches. Gonna face a team that's pretty heavily right-handed, even though he hasn't been bad against lefties, but the strikeout rate has been much higher against right-handers, 25%. We still see this Cardinals team strike out quite a bit against righties at times. So I don't mind going here with Clevinger and GPP. It's going to be overlooked. And I think this is a spot that's obviously a decent ballpark. The weather's cooled off a little bit in St. Louis. I think you can get away with using him in GPPs. I don't think it's a place you'll see a ton of ownership either. As far as guys that stand out against him, it's, maybe a Tommy Pham. It's guys that hit that fastball pretty well. Pham does 519 with 291 ISO. Jose Martinez 508, 306 ISO. But it's kind of it as far as the guys that I want to look at here. And against that slider, none of them hit particularly well, although Pham 263 ISO and only a 62% contact rate. So that's kind of it. And Pham is a guy who's questionable anyway. So if he's out of the lineup, it's just another bat that you can look at kind of as a better spot for Clevinger. Overall, St. Louis not a team that I'm looking to really get high on here. But Cleveland side of things are interesting. The hard contact rate to lefties is something that's a concern. And when you go back to last year with Gant, he's a guy who did allow a little bit more production to left-handed hitters. 57% hard contact rate, 195 ISO. That's something to note. He's a guy who will throw that sinker and changeup for a majority of time alongside his fastball. Indians, a little bit of a downgrade in the ballpark here. It's not tremendous, especially they're going to lose a DH. They're going to lose the ability to play like an Encarnacion and Yonder Alonso. It wouldn't surprise me to see Alonso in over Encarnacion, but we'll have to wait and see. If that's the case, I'm looking for guys that hit the sinker well. That's what I kind of want to look at, and that's guys like Lindor, Brantley, Ramirez, Alonso. Those are the guys that I'm looking at. Even Jason Kipnis, who's been struggling this year, but has a 375 WOBA, 204 ISO against that pitch, is interesting there. Outside of that, I think these guys are all fine cash game options, especially like Brantley and Chisenhall and Kipnis, some of the cheaper options. Lindor and Ramirez are in GPP potential just because they're up over 5K. I don't like paying that much in cash games for either of these guys, although they've been hot, especially in this ballpark. It's not the greatest of spots, but GPPs are certainly fine. Last game of the night here, we got Dwayne Underwood versus Kenta Maeda. Underwood making a start here. I'm going to just continue. I'm going to call him Frank Underwood for the most part, if he keeps pitching again. But a rookie right-hander making a start here. A guy that I don't mind targeting in the first start with hitters. Guys like Max Muncy just continue to rake 331 ISO, but when you look at other guys like Jock Peterson, who's been a beast of late, 303 ISO, Yasmani Grandal 226, Bellinger's been hitting the ball well. These are all guys that I want to look at. I'm looking at the lefties here. I don't mind him in a stack. I think because there's a lot of uncertainty with Underwood, you can look to go here. Implied total here right around 5 for the Dodgers tonight. Even a Justin Turner, who's always hit righties well, is something that I'm looking at. So get these names in. They're still fairly underpriced for these guys. Like Grandal's 3.8, Bellinger 4.3, Jock Peterson 4.2, Muncy 4.7 for his power of late. Fire away here. I definitely don't mind going there. Cubs side of things, Kenta Maeda, guy who has struggled with lefties, 38% hard contact, 359 WOBA, 196 ISO. Would be looking at some guys here. It's just Maeda throws a lot of junk. You're probably not going to see him for more than 5-6 innings anyway. If you're looking for guys that hit sliders well, it's Rizzo. You're right around a 70% contact rate, 198 ISO. Against that low velocity fastball that he throws, you're getting a lot of guys that do pound it. Jason Hayward, 370 WOBA, Zobrist, 354 WOBA. Rizzo's the only guy who oddly struggles against that range of fastball, but Schwarber, 385 ISO. If you're looking at the lefties, I'm not too high on them. I think they're interesting GPP options. Probably one-offs, wouldn't quite do the Cubs stack, but that's kind of how I'm looking. It's the big power lefties that I want to try and get a hold of, but overall, the Cubs side's not as appealing as the Dodgers, so that's it for me. I'll be back tomorrow. Brent back Tuesday, Wednesday. As far as my home run calls go tonight, Kyle Seager, and let's go with Adrian Beltre, 2 third base options there that I'm going with. So that's it for me. You can head over to DaveFantasyCafe.com. You can check out our tools and content, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.